question, which is what is vitality, I'd like to ask Scott Ferguson, head of our consumer technology group, to answer. Now, the question that's been asked is, what is vitality in a scientific sense, and why are you calling it vitality and not energy per se? So can you help define vitality for us, Scott?
Love to, Mark. So, as scientists, it's very important for us to first understand the problem we're studying and then address it. So as we looked at what was happening inside the body, we recognized that there were really three aspects, or three dimensions of vitality. The first is physical, second, mental, and the third, sexual. And when I talk about physical vitality, I'm talking about things like endurance, stamina, the resistance to fatigue, and so on. Now, mental vitality is, of course, about how our brain performs. We're talking about things like memory, alertness, clarity, and focus. And then with regards to sexual vitality, we're talking about things like libido and desire. Now, of course, that's a great thing. Everyone wants vitality, but the problem is it's completely wasted on the youth. As we age, the level of our vitality drops. And I don't know if anyone else feels like this at 5 o'clock, head down on the table, but I know in the past I have. The problem, of course, and the cause of this, is that our body's ability to generate energy and to effectively use that energy, it just drops as we age. So that's the problem, and that's vitality.
And it really leads to a very common question that people ask. Then what is actually happening inside our body that causes this vitality to decline as we age? What's going on?
Great question. So when you understand the molecular mechanism, or what's actually happening inside the body, then you can attack that problem. And so to understand is very simple. But I do first have to introduce you to a little component of the cell called the mitochondria. These little organelles, or these little compartments within every cell of our body are present, these mitochondria. And the mitochondria are the cellular power plants. So the air we breathe, the food we eat, they all get delivered to the cell. And the cell delivers that to the mitochondria, and the mitochondria create something called ATP. That sounds kind of technical, but that's just cellular energy. Now that ATP is very, very important because it drives every biological process. So for example, if I have a muscle cell that I'm studying, it's that ATP that allows it motion, allows it to move. Now if I'm studying a brain cell, it's the ATP that allows for proper cognitive function, like memory, clarity, and focus, all right? So obviously, the generation of this ATP is very important. Well, the problem with aging is that the number of these mitochondria in each cell, it just drops. And also, the ones that remain, they lose efficiency. This poses a huge problem to the cell, right? And there are these functional changes in the mitochondria, the loss of mitochondria and the loss in efficiency that have been tied to age-related vitality loss.
Well, that makes a lot of sense then. The cell's power plants, the mitochondria, are diminishing and they're becoming less efficient as you age. So, my next question would be, what has LifeGen done to help us to elucidate this problem and to gain a greater understanding of it?
That's really a very important point for us all to understand. That, as Angela mentioned, LifeGen allows us to look at multiple tissues and multiple genes. So we started to look at those tissues that were most important or most relevant to vitality and the loss with aging. So we looked at brain, we looked at heart, and we looked at muscle. All of these tissues have thousands of mitochondria and suffer greatly as we age. And as we looked at these three different tissues using the LifeGen technology, we performed studies in their laboratories on their model. And we then applied our expertise in natural products to screen for ingredients which can then influence these 52 genes and reset them to more youthful levels. And this has resulted in improvements in all three dimensions of vitality. Now, we actually took some of these research and we wanted to present them to the scientific community. And so just 6 weeks ago, my good colleague here, Dr. Steve Wood, traveled to Switzerland and showed some of our results to some of the most premier anti-aging scientists in the world. And Steve, why don't you give us a feel for how they responded to our approach?
Scott, they were really extremely positive about our approach to aging as well as looking at the genetic expression. These are some of the data that I presented, and you can see the brain and the heart. I could go on for days talking about what this really means. But in essence, what it was telling us, that we were able to feed an ingredient of ageLOC vitality and be able to have a more youthful expression.
Well, these are the kind of data that scientists love to present to each other. And as you can see, scientists sort of speak a different language when they're together. This graph really looks quite complex to the layperson, but to scientists it reveals a lot. Nevertheless, we understand that we don't have a lot of scientists in the audience. So I understand, Scott, that you've actually been able to recalibrate or reset this data, the exact same data, in a way that the average person can understand. So why don't you present that to us?
Yeah, I tried to explain this to people like my mom and my brothers, and they just couldn't understand it. So what we did is we put this same information into a different format. And that format is called a heat map. And what that provides is a visual representation of what's happening. And I think the significance of this discovery will be clear to everybody here. All right, so this is a heat map. This is those 52 mitochondrial youth genes that form the cluster, right? Now this represents youthful tissue, youthful individuals. And what you can see are that each one of the rows is one of those genes. And some of those genes are very low in their activity, and others are very high. The low is represented in green, and the high is represented in red. Again, we're talking about activity, so the rate at which they're producing their proteins, just like Mark talked about. Now, as we look at those same tissues in older individuals, what we see is a pretty dramatic shift. We see that many of the genes that were low active are now very highly active. That's called upregulation. Upregulation during the aging process. And others of those genes have downregulated. They started red and now they're green. Well, here's what's really interesting. We take those same old samples and we treat with ageLOC vitality and one of the ingredients for just 3 months, and what we see is just striking. Here, this is an old individual set with the ageLOC vitality science. And what you can see is pretty dramatic, right? You look at that on the right, and it is just visually clear that it is acting more youthful, right? I think anyone can see that that old individual with ageLOC science applied can act more youthful, and as a matter of fact, 92% of these mitochondrial youth gene clusters show a more youthful profile after ageLOC science. This is going to be a really nice selling tool for you in the field.
So this is very exciting results for our research team. And if we were to put that in a nutshell really, and to summarize what Scott's just talked about, for the first time we're able to identify a problem, in this case age-related vitality loss, target the underlying genes that are related to that change, and then screen for natural ingredients that can reset those genes to act in a more youthful fashion. So from then, all we need to do is develop formulations that follow through from these experiments. So this truly is resetting or addressing aging at the source. That's our ageLOC strategy. Thanks very much, Scott. Now, I understand that there's been a little bit of a leak, otherwise people wouldn't have asked me this next question, and that is, some of us understand that a study was done that addresses the mental dimension of vitality, mental acuity. Can you comment on that now, that we can officially release it?
We did run a really incredible study, and we haven't released this to a single distributor around the world, so this is, again, the first time. So we ran a little preclinical study. As you know, we do a lot of clinical studies at Nu Skin Pharma, right? Well, before we do the big, full-blown clinicals, we often like to do pilot studies, just to get all the bugs worked out before we do the larger and more expensive protocol. So in this study, we took 40 of our employees, 20 males and 20 females, and we actually had them perform cognitive testing, measuring their brain performance twice a week every week for 12 weeks. And then we divided that group up into 4, all right? The first group were taking no product whatsoever. We call this the null group, no product. Then there was the placebo. Now the next 3 groups was placebo controlled. The subjects didn't know what product they were taking. So this group got the placebo. The next group got our positive control. This positive control was a formula that we created that if it wasn't going to move or improve one's cognitive function, nothing will. And we kind of jokingly called it gold because it was literally so expensive, it was about worth its weight in gold. So then we also, in the 4th group, had ageLOC vitality. So let's see about the results. First, I should explain the score. What we did is we had them perform these computer-based tests that measured the 4 aspects of this cognitive function. The first is reaction time. The second, short-term memory. Then working memory. We did executive function, information processing, and then pattern recognition. We had them take these 6 tests. And then we gave each one of them a final score. And that final score was the average of these 6 tests. And we called that the cognitive function score. Now, this score was also normalized so that 100 was the top of the scale. 100 means it was the average score of those young, healthy, 20 to 25-year-old men and women, when the brains are working as good as they can, right? So 100 is the target where we want to be. Now, let's look at that null group, the group that wasn't taking any supplementation. Over the 12 weeks, you can see they got better and better, but not dramatically better. And really, the old adage goes, practice makes perfect, kind of explains how they continue to improve, right? Now, what about the placebo? We've all heard of the placebo effect. Just simply giving somebody a pill and telling them this is going to make you smarter and your brain work better, is that going to help them perform better? And the answer was no. There was no placebo in this. What about our positive control? Our gold? How well did it do? Well, it did do better, but not statistically better. It was really kind of disappointing. But this represents what other companies are putting on the market. When you just formulate a product, literature only, and you don't do any clinical studies. And you can see here, it really didn't work. Now, this is where it really gets interesting. How did vitality fare? Well, I think this speaks for itself, wouldn't you? And remember, this is placebo control. These groups didn't know which product they were taking. And also, take a look at that black line across the top, that 100 mark. Do you remember what that means? That's the average score of the young, healthy 20 to 25-year-old group. Now this is anti-aging, wouldn't you agree? And this really supports the feedback that we've had from the field that this mental acuity product, this vitality, addressing mental vitality, really has an effect on brain performance.
Thanks. That's very exciting, and what's really exciting is it sort of takes this concept, this gene concept, out of the lab and really where the rubber meets the road with people and effects on human performance. So thanks very much.